Okay, in this video we're going to take a quick look at some common string operations or methods, as well as some common math methods that are available to you through both the string and the math classes. Okay, and the first one we're going to look at actually doesn't require a method. It's just how do you iterate through a string. Well, first of all, you need to remember that a string is nothing more than an array or collection of characters. It is zero-based, just like arrays are. So you can, because of that, you can use either the for loop or the for each loop. In this example, I'm using the for each. I'm looking for every character, and I'm going to use the name CHR item in my code to reference that character for every character in the string original. I can then do something inside of my code then for that. So it's iterating through a string. You can split a string. This should be familiar with you from JavaScript. The split method takes a delimiter, and in this case though, the delimiter can actually be more than one. Here we just have a space. I could have a space, I could have a semicolon, I could add to that and create an array of delimiters, if you will. And when it splits all those values up, then it's going to store it into another string. Once I have them all split, then if I wanted to, I could use a for each statement then to rifle through all of those individual parts of that array to do something with it. The substring, same as JavaScript, two versions of it. In the first version here, all we're passing is one argument, 25. That means it's going to start at the index value of 25 and return everything from there to the end of the string. If you want specific characters, then you would have to use two different arguments. And the first argument is the starting position, again based on index. This 20 would be the 21st character, and it's going to return 3 characters. Comparing two strings, you can use the compare method. It takes 3 arguments. The first is the first string to compare, the second string to compare, and then a boolean, either true or false, on whether or not this is going to be looked at case sensitive. If it is case sensitive, then you want to use false. If it's not, then you use true. Notice also that this is comparing them to a numeric value, less than 0, greater than 0, or equal to 0. So these strings are compared similar to what we talked about in comparing strings in JavaScript. It looks at each character at a time, and using the ASCII value determines which one is higher, lower, or equal, and then checks that value. It returns that value, that difference, and if it's less than 0, then the first string is less than the second string. If it's greater than, then the first string is more than the second, and if they're both equal to 0, then the strings are equal. To test if it's null or empty, pretty simple, straightforward, is null or empty. To lowercase, shows you a couple different ways here. You could do this with lower or upper, but here we're taking an actual string, converting it to lowercase, and then we're going to store it in the string lower. And the second one, we actually use the string object, convert it to upper, but we have to pass it what we want to convert. The result of that will be then stored in the string upper. Replacing characters in a string, you do that with the .replace method. First argument is what's in the string that you want to replace. The second argument is what do you want to replace it with. Removing, similar to the substring, only you're actually literally removing them. Take our string, .remove, starting at the index of 25, or the 26th character, it would remove from that character all the way into the end of the string. Where the second one is starting at the 20th character and removing 5 specific characters. So it would be removing the index of 20, 21, 22, 23, 24. Those would be the 21st through 25th characters. There is a trim with C#. There's also a trim end and a trim start. It provides an overload here, overload function, but it removes the leading and trailing spaces as well as any other unwanted character you put in there. So in the simple example we have here, we just have some new string we test, starts with a space, ends with a space and 2 pound marks or hash symbols, and then we're going to trim this looking for the spaces and the pound symbol. When this is done, we would only have some new string we test, no spaces on either end and no pound symbols. You can pad a string. There's either a pad left or a pad right, depending on which side you want to pad it. So this example has a string sample that just equals barbecue and slaw. If we use the pad left and pass it one argument, which is 15, we will get barbecue and slaw. Since we're using the pad left, it'll increase that with just spaces until it maxes out at the 15 character length. The second one has a pad left of 5. Notice that the result is the same as the original. It is already over what we want to pad it to, which is 5 characters. Since it's already over that, there is no padding added. But the good news is it does not truncate it either. Then what if we wanted to add a special character? A lot of accountants seem to prefer putting a period in front of things, so we just have a character defined here as a period, and then we add a second parameter to the call to the pad left in both of these. In the first one, it's going to add 3 dots, 3 periods in front of barbecue and slaw to make sure that it actually has 15 characters. And the second one, again, it doesn't add anything because it already is barbecue and slaw. So it doesn't add any. It's already 2 characters long and doesn't truncate it either. If you want to create a delimited string, that's pretty easy. You can use the join. Again, very similar to C or to JavaScript. We create an array of strings, string 1, 2, and 3. Then we are going to create a second variable, which is string modified, and we're going to use the string function, the join method, and we're going to use then the first argument is what are you going to use to delimitate it. In this case we're using a semicolon, and what are you adding? It's going to go into that A string strings and get string 1, string 2, string 3, each of them being separated by a semicolon. Index of and last index of, should be familiar with these. These return the index value of where it finds whatever you pass as the argument. So where the starting position of what you find, whether it's a single character or multiple characters, it's going to look for that and tell you where it found that. The last index just starts looking from the end. Start with and ends with, these return true or false. You can check to see if a certain value begins with a certain prefix or ends with a certain suffix. So if you were looking at phone numbers, this would be great to find all the ones that start with 513. There are regular expressions in C#, as you know from using your form validators. That's what those basically use. But sometimes you need to create one outside of validating a form to check some string expression. Well, the regular expression is part of the system.text.regularExpression namespace, so you'd have to add that to your page if you're going to use that. The red X initializes a new instance of the red expression class. You can also pass a string to it, which would then create a new instance of the regular expression class with the specified regular expression that you have in there as a string. The isMatch method is typically used to validate a string or to ensure that a string conforms to a particular pattern without retrieving that string for subsequent manipulation. Things we want to look at with math, pretty simple things. We're not going to get into a lot of them. There are much more than we're going to look at here. The ceiling actually rounds up, so to speak. It's always going to round up no matter what. Whether it's closer to the lower number or higher number, it's always going to round up to the next number. Floor is just the opposite. It rounds down, always rounds down. Max takes two values, returns whichever one is the larger of two. Minimum takes two values, returns the smaller of the two numbers. The POW or power takes a value, and then the power between those two attributes, then it returns a specified number or value raised to the specific power. The round just rounds to the nearest. So instead of ceiling or floor, this is going to round to the nearest. And then one that you may not have seen before is the round that takes two arguments. It takes a value that you want to round, probably a floating value of some sort, and then you specify through the int32 how many fractional digits should be displayed. So if you're getting something like pi and you wanted to confine that to two decimal places, you would pass pi in as the value, 2 in for the int32, and it would come back as 3.14. Square root returns the square root of the number that's passed into it, and there are two constants inside of the math object or math class. The one of most note here would obviously be pi, and as you see, it returns this value. So those are some things to get you started with strings and math as we go through this 2-week span of just testing your programming skills at this point before we continue on with ASP.NET.